Hello, travelers! Welcome back to the Hungry Shark Tavern. Today we are going to be taking a deep dive into soups, or specifically a type of soup called a potage. Now, potages were a kind of thick soup or stew, typically made from mashed vegetables, meat, grains, and nuts, and it was a general term used before soup was an actual commonplace word, adapted from an old French word meaning anything that was put into a pot. Nourishing, refreshing, and revitalizing, these were a staple among the average people of medieval Europe as they could be made effortlessly with readily available ingredients. The soup, or potage, that we will be taking a look at today is a type of cold potato and leek soup called Viccyssoise. The true origin of this soup is a matter of some debate. Julia Child describes potage parmentier as the origin of the soup, named for Antoine Auguste Parmentier. He is a name that will come up in another video that I will be making, but to put it simply, he was a somewhat eccentric noble that is, through certain antics that he did, responsible for transforming the potato from something treated with a lot of suspicion to being an almost indispensable and immeasurable treasure throughout Europe. Another tale dates back to King Louis XV. As the tale goes, King Louis absolutely loved his food, loved his soup, but he was also a very careful man, a very suspicious man, an almost paranoid individual, and he thought that someone would try to poison him. Therefore, he ordered his servants to taste the soup and only serve it to him when they were sure that it was not poisoned. As the story goes, by the time he had a chance to try it, the soup had already grown cold.
Thanks. Cold.
It's Viccyssoise. It's supposed to be cold.
However, he had actually taken a liking to the soup being cold. Now, the most concrete origin we have for this cold version of the soup Viccyssoise is from the late French chef Louis Diop. Louis created the soup while he was working at the Ritz-Carlton in New York in 1917. And his inspiration, according to a 1950 interview, was from a soup that he had in his childhood, which I'm going to quote right now. In the summer of 1917, when I had been at the Ritz for 7 years, I reflected upon the potato and leek soup of my childhood, which my mother and grandmother used to make. I recalled how, during the summer, my older brother and I used to cool it off by pouring in cold milk, and how delicious it was. Louis had taken his favorite childhood comfort food and turned it into something elegant and refined, and named it after a town near where he had grown up, French city of Vichy. With that out of the way, let's get on to the fun stuff. Before we touch anything, we're going to want to have all our ingredients prepped, so here's what we're going to get prepared. We're going to want 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to want to grab 3 leeks, cut off those large fibrous ends at the back, the dark green parts. We're going to slice off the white parts into half moons. Make sure that everything's been washed properly. We do not want any grit in there. We're going to have 3 cups of chicken stock. We're going to take 2 white potatoes, peel them, slice them thin. We're going to have a cup of milk. We're going to have some fresh ground white pepper, a cup of heavy cream, and salt as we season along. To start, we're going to get those 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're going to set them inside that large saucepan and heat them over low heat to melt it. Once the butter has melted, we're going to add the leeks to that, and we're going to stir them occasionally over low heat for about 10 minutes to make sure that they sweat, soften, and just caramelize lightly. We want to keep stirring every so often just so we make sure that no part of that burns and that something doesn't caramelize too much. Once the leeks have sweated properly, we're going to be adding the stock and the sliced potatoes to that, and we're going to increase the heat to get that mixture up to a nice low simmer. Once it's simmering, we're going to set a cover on top of that, and we're going to leave it alone for about 40 minutes to do its own thing. Once about 40 minutes has passed, we're going to take the cover off and we're going to transfer our soup to a blender in order to be able to get it to a nice puree. Now you can use an immersion blender with this. I find that it has a hard time breaking up the potatoes well, so I prefer to use a stand mixer for this part. Now once we got a puree that's nice and consistent, we want to strain out any of the fibrous material in there from the leeks or from the potatoes to make sure that we got as smooth a soup as possible in our final product. I recommend personally for this to get a large strainer like this guy over here and just pour it right on into a bowl, and then we use the back end of a ladle to kind of push things around to make sure that it goes through. This is going to speed up the process so much and make it such a simpler thing to do. Once that's all said and done, we're going to be returning our mixture to our saucepan, and to that we're going to be adding the milk and the ground white pepper. We're going to stir that up, make sure it's nice and even, and then we're going to heat that up on medium-low heat to get right to the edge of a simmer. Once it's right at that simmer point, we are going to be taking our pot and we are going to be removing it from the heat. And then we're going to be whisking in our cup of heavy cream. And once that's through, we're going to be adjusting our seasoning. You can add more salt, add more white pepper, whatever suits your taste, just to make sure that it's where you want it to be. Once it's there, we're going to take our soup and we're going to put it in the fridge to let it cool. Typically, this is going to take about several hours or so to get to that nice cold temperature that we want. Once that soup is rested and cooled down a lot, we're going to take it back out and it's going to be ready to serve. Now, you can serve it on its own as is. I sometimes like to add a bit of chopped chive with it, maybe a little drizzle of garlic oil on top. You can suit it to your own tastes. Now, I hope you enjoyed this nice simple recipe from me. It's a very simple dish to make, very easy, very refreshing, and I'd like to hear from you maybe any ideas you had and ways to change it up. Maybe things that you liked along the way, maybe things you thought to add in, maybe things to change. Cooking is all an experimental process, and it's always good to try and think about different ways in which you can make something better. You can even serve the soup hot, actually. It's one of those few things that's good both hot and cold. I am TacoShark, and I hope you enjoyed your stay here at the Hungry Shark Tavern.